As we mentioned yesterday, the primary elections in Arizona, as we mentioned about yesterday's primary, they included some surprising results, along with a number of more predictable outcomes. And for an overview of everything that went on yesterday and last night and what it means for November's general election, we welcome Jim Small of the Arizona Mirror. Jim was up late last night, so forgive me if I get a little stumble-bumbly here because lots going on. What was your take on all this?
I think it was an interesting, a lot of interesting outcomes. A number of very close races. As you kind of went through on the rundown there, several competitive congressional races, and a couple of them, all three of them, really are at this point, I think, too close to call. Although it does look like there are some pretty clear leaders in all of them. I think coming into it, everyone expected that they would be tightly run and pretty closely contested. And it was really just kind of a matter. I mean, I've made a lot of phone calls in the last week about who people think is going to win the CD1 Democratic primary or the CD8 Republican race. And, people were kind of all over the board on it. Not really any clear front runners coming into these races.
Let's start with Kari Lake. And again, as I mentioned in the headline, she won. No one expected her not to win, but I think a lot of folks expected her to win by a bigger margin than she got.
Yeah, I think so. And I think certainly if you had held this election 2 months ago, I think you would have probably seen a much larger victory for Kari Lake. And what's happened in the last couple of months is there have been a number of Republicans who have, basically said, look, I need to sound the alarm that this is a campaign. Kari Lake versus Ruben Gallego is not a good matchup, and that Ruben Gallego is going to be the front runner in that race, and that it's going to be incredibly difficult for Kari Lake to connect with voters and to kind of overcome the deficit she already has. And there were a number of very prominent Republicans, including among them Randy Kendrick, who's a very wealthy GOP donor, the wife of Diamondback's managing partner Ken Kendrick, who basically publicly came out and said, we need to do something about this. We need to rally support for Mark Lamb. We need to try to figure out a way to make sure Kari Lake's not the nominee. Obviously, it didn't work, but I think that might explain some of those softer numbers you saw. Yeah,
and there you see the final, well, not the final numbers, but the last numbers we have, and it's obvious that she's going to win, but I don't know. If I'm in the Gallego camp, I think that looks pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Gallego camp and the Democrats have wanted Kari Lake to be the nominee. I mean, Arizonans know who she is. Her weaknesses are easily identifiable from a Democratic strategy perspective, and I think that they've been waiting to get on the campaign trail to really focus their fire on her.
CD8, the Debbie Lesko seat, six-way primary. As I mentioned, I don't know what Donald Trump was doing coming in at the last second, supporting Masters when he'd already support Hamadeh. But that early support of Hamadeh, do you think early voting may have tipped the scales on this one?
I think it certainly could have. I mean, I think Arizona elections, even in Republican primaries, even after all of the ire aimed at early voting is still very popular in Arizona. Yeah. Most voters still take advantage of it, even in Republican primaries. So certainly I think no one gets through an election in Arizona without doing well among early voters. And Abe Hamadeh certainly had that Trump endorsement right off the go. This was a crowded field. These contests where you have 4, 5, 6 people in them, where the winner is going to have between 20 and 30%. Those are always difficult to game plan, and it really does kind of come down to winning on the margins.
Where does Ben Toma go from here? I mean, he finished back there. He did not. He was not in the winner place. I think he showed, but that's about it. I mean, where does he go from here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not entirely sure what's going to be next for him. I'm sure just knowing him and the passion he has for politics and for policy, I'm sure he'll end up in the mix somewhere doing something, whether it's as an elected official or whether it's more on the policy side.
I want to talk about the county recorder and Stephen Richer, because this was a race closely watched here in Arizona and frankly around the country because of his efforts to make folks understand that there were no problems, certainly no serious problems with the election. It wasn't rigged. It wasn't a sham and all that kind of. He paid the price, didn't he?
He sure did. He spent the last 3.5 years really trying to stand up and say, look, I'm a Republican, I'm a conservative, I'm a member of the Federalist Society. This was fine. Our elections are safe. They are secure. They are run well. They are run by, these are not, there's no nefarious things that are happening here. And, I think obviously that is not a message that resonates in the Republican primary. I think Republican voters have been primed to distrust the elections, even as they're going to cast their ballot in them. And I certainly don't think that Stephen Richer did himself any favors among voters when he came out a few weeks ago and said that he was going to vote for Joe Biden over Donald Trump, given all of Donald Trump's election denialism and things like that. Understandable why he said it. Certainly the timing was not great, and I don't think that did him any favors with Republican voters.
Real quickly, a couple of Democratic races, as we mentioned, CD1 six-way primary. Amish Shah looks like he's got that. It's still pretty close there. Are you surprised by that?
That was the one I think that most people really just kind of looked at and went, boy, I don't know how this is going to shake out. If this is going to be Amish Shah or Marlene Gallon Woods or Connor O'Callaghan or Andre Cherny. I mean, you kind of had you had 3 or 4 people that were really all sort of clumped together. Even in the polling, there hadn't been any kind of trend in the polling that showed this one person or these 2 people were really at the top of the heap. I think a lot of people looked at it and said, well, Woods, Marlene Garland Woods was, the late wife of Attorney General Grant Woods. She had the support of a lot of the institutional Democrats, had kind of lined up behind her. Janet Napolitano, Chris Mays, others, and some of the other Democratic groups had really lined up behind her to bolster her campaign. And so I think that there was a sense that she was probably, if there was going to be a frontrunner, she would have been it. Obviously, Amish Shah, known as a very hard campaigner when he was in the legislature, and it translated apparently in the congressional race.
Last one here before you go, Raquel Tehran and Yasmin Ansari. Again, this was CD3. This is to replace Ruben Gallego. Were you surprised at this one?
Another one that I think a lot of observers were really split as to what was going to happen here, because they both have constituencies. They both are good campaigners. They both had solid messages, solid positions and everything. I mean, really, that this race boiled down to each side trying to smear the other one for their ties to Republican donors, and based on money that they took for their campaigns when they were working, in elected office, which is, one of the hazards of being in elected office. And so, at the end of the day, not terribly surprised, but I wouldn't have been surprised with either outcome.
Before you go, last question here. What does all this say about the makeup of the state legislature, the possible makeup of the state legislature come November?
Well, Democrats are making a full court press to win control of the legislature. They have not controlled the legislature in Arizona in about 60 years. And they really do view 2024 as their best opportunity to do it. And I think that there's an even more of an invigoration in that following Joe Biden dropping out of the presidential race and Kamala Harris coming in, and it seems to have kind of breathed some life into a lot of these campaigns. I've spent most of my day on the phone talking with Republicans and Democrats about just this topic. And, Republicans think that they're going to be able to hold it off and that they're going to be able to beat back the challenge. But the Democrats are really bullish about their opportunities on the electoral map this year.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Jim Small, Arizona Mirror, always a pleasure, man. Good to have you here.
Thank you.